Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, breaking overnight, landfall. Nicholas slams the Gulf Coast as a Category 1 hurricane, bringing heavy rain and fierce winds and leaving tens of thousands of people without power. But could this be like Ida, bringing deadly flooding to some areas? We're tracking the storm's path. Election Day, Californians heading to the polls to vote in today's consequential recall election as President Biden takes aim at Governor Gavin Newsom's top Republican challenger.
He's the clone of Donald Trump. Can you imagine him being governor of this state? You can't let that happen.
Why the president says the outcome of this race will have a lasting impact not only on the state or the nation, but possibly the world. And we'll have a closer look at that main Republican challenger. Tough fight. Hollywood legend Jeff Bridges opens up about coming down with COVID-19 while undergoing cancer treatment. What the dude himself had to say about his experience and the positive prognosis after spending 5 weeks in the hospital. And styles and statements. The fashion world's biggest night definitely did not disappoint. We'll show you the most memorable looks from the Met Gala red carpet, including some surprise appearances. Plus, why one star who didn't even show up is making headlines this morning. Certainly were some looks.
Yeah, there were. I love seeing the photos.
I know. Every year, the morning after, you're like, wow, how'd they walk in that?
I drove by it this morning in the aftermath as they were picking up the pieces. It's not as glamorous.
Yeah. All right, we'll show you more of those pictures in a little while, but we do want to begin with that breaking news from Texas, where Nicholas strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane just hours before making landfall this morning.
Rescues are underway as heavy rain drenches the Lone Star State. Nicholas could bring up to 15 inches of rainfall in remote parts of Texas. Well, some cities may see between 5 to 10 inches. Flash flooding remains a threat for many residents in low-lying areas. And you can see just how strong the winds are there. A Citgo gas station roof collapsed in Matagorda, Texas, as rain and wind pummeled the coastline. The storm is now making its way to Louisiana, where power outages are already being reported. We have our team covering all the angles of the storm. We'll check in with Bill Cairns, who's tracking Nicholas this morning. But we start with Vaughn Hilliard on the ground in Texas. So, Vaughn, you're in Houston, where they fear flash flooding could be life-threatening. Of course, we all think back to Hurricane Harvey, where the flooding was such a huge issue in that area. What are you seeing so far this morning?
Exactly, Joe. What you're seeing over the course of tonight has been sustained rainfall here, about 3 up to 4 inches in the greater Houston area. You know, and I think it's important, though, when we're looking at the totality of this storm, to put it in relationship to 2017 and Harvey, when up to 50 inches of rain fell across the greater Harris County area here. Again, we are far off from that, but that doesn't stop concerns over flash flood risks here in the hours of Ed. Still more inches of rain expected here in the region. And you can see here, there's also been 25, 30 mile per hour wind, gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Those winds here through the Houston area are expected to continue to increase ever so slightly here through essentially the midday lunch period area here in the greater Houston area, Joe.
Vaughn, we know tens of thousands of people have already lost power in Houston. How prepared were they for Nicholas, especially for the storm to make landfall as a hurricane?
Exactly. That's where officials are saying, look, when you're dealing with a tropical storm, you're dealing with an hour's worth of wind gusts here. And that is where you are now looking at across the greater Houston, across the greater Texas area, 400,000 individuals that are currently without power because of this storm. And those officials are saying, wait to go outside. Wait, because those wind gusts will continue to be sustained. And until those wind gusts go down to a reasonable level, that is when those power crews can get back out there. But again, 400,000 here across Texas are without power because of this storm, Joe.
And as you mentioned, I mean, the big threat from this storm isn't really the wind, but it's the rain, the threat of severe flooding. How concerned are officials there about that, especially after what we saw Ida do in New Orleans and even in the Northeast when it was no longer a hurricane? Are they concerned we could see something similar in Texas and Louisiana?
With these ever-evolving storms, Joe, I mean, it's an hour by hour, and what you saw over the course of the night was this storm really take on further east of where we are. That is where Galveston is already sustained about 13 inches of rain. And I'll let Bill speak to where this forecast is heading. But right here in the Houston area, they're only expecting a couple more inches of rainfall and wind. And really the concern and where we're probably going to be heading next is further east into Louisiana, where I was just a couple days ago, where the folks there still, thousands of them without power and still concerned over their own situation from Ida. There's a much more concern as we look further east and probably where we're going to be heading next, Joe.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard, thanks so much. As Vaughn suggested, let's get the very latest on Nicholas's path.
Yeah. Hey, Bill Cairns. He joins us now. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, good morning. Let's just take a step back for a second and realize this is the 9th hurricane landfall in the lower 48 in the last 2 hurricane seasons. I mean, that's incredible. If you want to include all the tropical storms we've had make landfall, we've now had 19 storms make landfall in the last 17 months. That's like mind-boggling stats, and too many of them have been hitting areas of Louisiana. So the storm did make landfall as a hurricane. We had a 95-mile-per-hour wind gust in Matagorda. That's where you saw that gas station sign go down, and that's the type of damage you'll see with a Category 1 hurricane. The Houston area, we were very afraid yesterday of the rainfall in Houston, and it has been raining. It's raining still pretty hard right now, but it is not like the rain to the east. This track a little closer to Houston or over the top of it, the dirty right side is mostly missing Houston, so we're happy to say for all the millions of people that live around the greater Houston area, the flash flood threat really is not as bad as we thought it would be. That's great for you. But then for Beaumont, Port Arthur, Lake Charles, through Louisiana, the forecast has gotten worse for them, just in terms of heavy rain. We're not too concerned with the winds anymore. The winds have really come down quickly. Look at the only 30-mile-per-hour gust near the center of the storm at Houston Intercontinental Airport. So the winds are not causing any more damage. We should not have that many more power outages. If you have your power on right now, you are likely to maintain it through the remainder of this storm because it's mostly just going to be a rain event. The 5 o'clock update had 70-mile-per-hour winds. I think this next update will be like 60 or 55. The winds have really weakened quickly with this storm. So the story today, tonight, and into tomorrow, maybe even into Thursday, this thing is just going to do a slow jog into Louisiana, and that means the chance for some really heavy rainfall totals. Flash flood watch includes areas all the way through Biloxi and even Mobile. 10 million people included in this. Notice that the Houston area is not. All of the heavy rain is east of Houston. And look at that rainfall total in New Orleans. Everyone's waking up this morning and going, what? The storm's in Houston. Why are we getting so much rain? Up to 10 inches possible from New Orleans all the way through southern Louisiana to Lake Charles. This is the area that has been hit by so many storms. It's ridiculous. So that's the area of concern, guys. We don't have a lot of other weather concerns out there today, a few storms in the Midwest, but you got to feel for Louisiana. I mean, they just can't win.
Yeah, this year and last year, too. All right. Bill, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Bill, we'll check in a bit. Some top scientists are now questioning the need for coronavirus booster shots less than a week before that third dose could become available to all fully vaccinated Americans. An expert review by international scientists, including some at the World Health Organization and the FDA, found the vaccines are still highly effective against severe cases of COVID, including the Delta variant. As of now, nearly 54% of Americans could be coming back for that third dose soon. But it's still unclear who of that 54% will be at the front of the line. An FDA committee is meeting Friday to review Pfizer's booster, the only vaccine that submitted data for a third dose so far, and they'll discuss who should get that shot and when. Dr. Amesh Adalja is here to help us understand all of this. He's a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Dr. Adalja, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. So what do you make of this expert review on booster shots? We've heard you need them. Now maybe we don't need them. I mean, if top scientists say the vaccines still offer good protection, should we hold off on them for now?
I do think that for healthy people, the argument that we need boosters isn't a very strong one. There's not data to show that we're having erosion of what the vaccine does when it comes to serious disease, hospitalization, and death. We may need boosters sometime down the road, but I don't think September 20th or 6 months or 8 months is going to be the magic number. I think we have to be proactive about it. But when we look at healthy people and see who's getting hospitalized after they've been vaccinated, it's not the vaccinated individuals. And I think we have to ask, what did we want this vaccine to do? And it was to prevent serious illness. And these vaccines are holding up really well. So I don't think that this is something that we should be moving forward with until there's strong clinical data to back it up.
So, doctor, if we put aside healthy people and we know that immunocompromised Americans are already getting that booster shot, which includes a lot of elderly people, who should come next? I mean, what could this rollout look like, even if we take out those healthy people?
The next group that might need to have a third dose would probably be those that live in nursing homes, those that are above the age of 75 properly. I think those subgroups, you might see some erosion, or there's at least some hint of erosion that people have been mentioning. But again, we still need clinical data to see that. And when it comes to the immunocompromised, remember that third dose isn't really a booster. It's a modification of the primary series, meaning they need 3 doses up front. It's not because they need to be boosted. It's because they don't usually respond to the 2-dose regimen, and they were getting hospitalized at higher rates with breakthroughs. So that was a totally different process, and one that was really well supported by clinical data.
And now, Dr. Dalja, before I let you go, I want to ask you a question about vaccine mandates and specifically for airline passengers, because Dr. Anthony Fauci recently said that air travelers should get the coronavirus vaccine to fly. Given the fact that that's not required, we can imagine that people who are not vaccinated have been flying. What do you think of that, and what kind of impact would that have on the spread of the virus?
Well, we know that the airlines have done a really tremendous job of making flight very, very safe with masks, cleaning protocols, with their ventilation. So I don't know that there's a big marginal benefit if passengers are all vaccinated. That might be something you'd want to do if, for example, you're going to remove the masking requirement, which I don't think is going to be gone anytime soon. I think this is something that the airlines themselves should do. We know that United, for example, and Frontier have mandated vaccinations for their employees. This is something that they could do. I would certainly patronize an airline more if they had everybody on there vaccinated, but I don't know that this will accomplish much if it's done through government regulation. I think this should be left to the airlines to decide and do.
Absolutely. And maybe, if anything, even if it doesn't help with spread on the planes, it would help with hesitancy if you needed to get that shot to go anywhere. Dr. Dalja, thank you so much. Always good to see you.
France is joining other European countries in reimposing travel restrictions on some Americans. Since Sunday, the U.S. has been taken off France's safe list and put on the higher-risk orange list amid growing concerns about rising COVID-19 cases. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from Paris. So, Molly, what are the new travel rules for Americans hoping to visit France, keeping in mind many probably booked their travel months ago when they didn't really think COVID would be as big of a deal as it is right now?
Hey, Joe, that's right. Look, so if you are fully vaccinated and want to come to France as a tourist, no problem, no change. You can still do that. The changes are among anyone who's not vaccinated. So you now need an essential reason. So if you're not vaccinated, you can't come to France just as a tourist. You need to show a negative test. And once you're here, Joe, if you're unvaccinated, you need to quarantine for 7 days. Of course, the whole point is to encourage people to get vaccinated by removing privileges like walking into the country freely. Joe?
So, Molly, we've seen over recent weeks protests against France's health pass, which is needed to enter certain venues and restaurants, similar to what we're seeing this week in New York. What do tourists make of it?
Yeah, and I've already downloaded it. It was really user-friendly. You did also mention those protests. Just to be really clear and put it in context, they're not widely popular. So only 37% of French people polled actually approve of these protests. But I did speak with 2 Dutch women who are here for tourism. Take a quick listen to what they say may or may not be working about the health pass.
Well, I know a lot of people who do not want to get vaccinated, and they will stick to the plan. They will not get vaccinated, and even if it restricts them, they're very firm about their beliefs. There are some people that doubt, like, for instance, they didn't get their children vaccinated, and then they have doubts whether they can get, to have a family vacation, and they might move to vaccinations. But I know a lot of people that are really against the vaccination and this will not change.
So, Joe, that's really interesting, actually, where they're from. Of course, Holland, the Holland Parliament is going to be debating and talking about a similar pass later today. But their point was that they actually think the people who so staunchly don't believe in the vaccine, nothing's going to motivate them. So, nothing for travel, nothing for getting into restaurants. But I got to say, the health pass here, we downloaded it, we've used it, and restaurants and cafes are checking, really vigilantly to make sure that you are vaccinated or at least have a negative test. Joe?
All right. Molly reporting from Paris. Thank you so much. Polling places open this morning for a critical election in California. Voters there will decide the fate of Governor Gavin Newsom, who's facing a recall. More than 8 million ballots have already been returned. during early voting.
Yeah, and the latest polls show Newsom is likely to survive the attempt to remove him from office, but he isn't taking any chances, bringing in some heavy reinforcements ahead of today's vote.
California, I mean this sincerely, the eyes of the nation are on you. I'm not joking. I'm not joking about that. You've got to vote no on the recall. Keep Gavin as governor. The rest of America is counting on you, and so am I.
Newsom's Republican challenger, Larry Elder, was actually one of the last names to be added to the ballot in California's recall election, but now he's the party's leading contender. So who is the candidate, and how did he become the GOP frontrunner? Here's NBC News Digital reporter Alex Seitzwald.
Either we vote no on this recall, or in a matter of weeks, the next governor of the state of California is Larry Elder.
This election is about crime. Election is about homelessness. This election is about the fact that people are leaving California for the very first time.
Larry Elder has been around for a long time in California. He's a conservative talk radio host, has been on the air for 30 years. He's attracted controversy for his entire career.
You could make an argument that the people that are owed reparations, and not only just black people, but also the people whose, quote, property, close quote, was taken away after the end of the Civil War.
He got in this race super late, but he immediately shot to the top of the polls, largely because he already had this established base of support from his radio show. And he had a little bit of star power that the other kind of more conventional politician candidates lacked.
So many Californians are angry about what's going on in this state regarding the cost of living, regarding homelessness.
California is facing a lot of challenges that are very real and not particularly partisan. The cost of living is going up. There have been wildfires that are threatening major population centers. There's a major drought.
The price at which we're building houses is far more expensive than would be the case if the private sector did it. And with federal land would not be subject to the rules and regulations in California that cause the price of houses to be so high. You could build small houses cheaply, and then unhoused people would have somewhere to go.
So there's two questions on the ballot. The first one is, should Gavin Newsom be recalled, be removed from office, yes or no? Then the second question is, if yes, if he should be removed from office, who should replace him? Whoever wins a plurality on the second question, whoever gets the most votes, wins and would become governor if the first question succeeds. You don't need to win a majority. You don't even need to win a big plurality. You just need a slightly bigger plurality than anybody behind you. So 25% may be all it takes for Larry Elder to win on the second ballot of this recall, because he's tapping into that hardcore base while everyone else is getting, 2, 3, 4, 5%. I think a lot of people are rightly wondering, how could somebody like Larry Elder, a right-wing provocateur, end up as the front runner in California, famously one of the most liberal states in the country? The thing about this recall is Republicans are far more motivated to vote than Democrats. If you tallied up every vote and everybody voted, it would not even be a contest. Democrats outnumber Republicans 2-1. There's no way that Larry Elder would win a typical election. But if Democrats don't show up and Republicans do, then you could end up with Larry Elder as the next governor of California.
Coming up, nuclear concerns this morning. Iran is now reportedly within weeks of having enough material to fuel an atomic bomb.
Yeah, details on this possible milestone and what it could signal for the U.S. next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back on Capitol Hill today, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It comes a day after he faced heavy criticism from both sides of the aisle at a congressional hearing. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now with more on this. Leanne, good morning. So, this was a tough session for Secretary Blinken. How did he defend his and the Biden administration's actions?
Good morning, Savannah. It was a really tough day for Secretary Blinken yesterday. He defended his administration's decision to leave Afghanistan, and he blamed the former president, Donald Trump, for saying that the Biden administration inherited a deadline, but not a plan. Now listen to how he described the choices before the Biden administration.
Upon taking office, President Biden immediately faced the choice between ending the war or escalating it. Had he not followed through on his predecessor's commitment, attacks on our forces and those of our allies would have resumed, and the Taliban's nationwide assaults on Afghanistan's major cities would have commenced. That would have required sending substantially more U.S. forces into Afghanistan.
Secretary Blinken insisted that the Biden administration made the right decision for both the short term and the long term, Savannah.
Now, Leanne, let's get into some of that criticism I mentioned, and Republican criticism was particularly intense. Tell us about some of what they said.
Yeah, Republicans did not go easy on Secretary Blinken. They called him a liar. They called on him to resign. There was one extremely tense moment between Secretary Blinken and Florida Republican Brian Mast. Let's listen.
Do not believe whatsoever what you're saying about the administration not working to manipulate that intelligence. I absolutely wonder if you were complicit in this as well. I find it hard to believe that President Biden would do that without you being aware of this. And these are things that we deserve to know better answers, have better hearings on this. I do not believe a word that you're saying on this.
Simply put,
I do not wish to hear from you. I'm not
simply
yielding you
put,
a moment
Congressman, what you
I'm
said
not
is
yielding
dead
you a moment
wrong.
of time. I don't wish to hear your lies.
So that was the worst of it, but it was extremely difficult yesterday. And it wasn't just Republican members of Congress who had tough words. The political Republican National Committee put out a very stinging statement yesterday as well, calling on the Americans deserve answers, transparency, and accountability. That accountability needs to start with Blinken. He must be fired. So the fact that the RNC put out a statement shows that Republicans are also going to make this a political issue. One Republican aide told me yesterday, Savannah, that Republicans are going to continue to talk about Afghanistan.
And Leanne, so let's talk about what's next for Blinken. Up today, he's got Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Can he expect a better reception there? How might that go?
Well, he's still going to have a very difficult reception. It probably won't be as showy as it usually is in the House of Representatives. The Senate is usually a bit more respectful, but Secretary Blinken is going to have very difficult questions to answer from both parties, Savannah.
All right, Leanne Caldwell, thanks so much for joining us.
As Secretary Blinken continues to feel the heat over the U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan, one country is being praised for its role in helping to evacuate people from the country. The wealthy Gulf nation of Qatar is seeing its stock rise in the U.S. following a turbulent relationship over the last few years. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now with more on this. So, Josh, how important has Qatar been for the United States these last few months? And remind us of just how that country has been helping in Afghanistan.
It's pretty remarkable if you think about how reliant the U.S. has been, Joe, on a country of less than 400,000 citizens, a country smaller in space than the size of Connecticut, to do literally every part of our exit from Afghanistan in this airlift. More than 58,000 people airlifted from Kabul to Doha, Qatar, including American citizens, Afghan allies, and others, the largest group going to Doha by far, more than Germany and any other place. Qatar was also instrumental in actually getting Americans safely to the airport in Kabul, with the Qatari ambassador in Afghanistan personally escorting Americans through Taliban checkpoints. And now that the U.S. is out of Afghanistan, it was Qatari technical teams who went back to that airport, now under Taliban control, and got it back up and running so that flights could actually resume post the U.S. withdrawal to get more people out of the country. And with the U.S. shuttering its embassy in Afghanistan, we have now relocated all of our diplomats who are working on Afghanistan to Qatar. They're now working out of an office in Doha, where the Taliban have maintained a political office for years, Joe.
Josh, let's go back in time a little further. The U.S. and Qatar did not always get along so well, even in recent years. How did things deteriorate under the Trump administration?
Yeah, if you flash back to this time 4 years ago, President Trump was blasting Qatar as a funder of terrorism at very high levels. He was siding with Qatar's rivals, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, in their diplomatic crisis with Qatar, and accusing the tiny gas-rich country of fomenting Islamist dissent throughout the region. But that, in part, was due to a strategy that Qatar has long maintained. They see themselves as a mediator. They say they're too small to pose a threat militarily to anyone. And so instead, they want to facilitate discussions. And so they've maintained ties with controversial groups like Iranian officials, Hamas, as well as the Muslim Brotherhood, and yes, the Afghan Taliban. And now, 4 years later, that strategy seems to have paid off, because now that we are forced to deal with the Taliban one way or another, since they control Afghanistan, it is Qatar, where the Taliban have long had a home, that is now the neutral ground where the U.S. has been able to actually have conversations with the Taliban about important things like getting Americans out.
On top of that, Josh, could this strengthening of relations with Qatar also impact our standing with other Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates?
It sure could have an effect on that delicate balance of power between rival nations in the Middle East, such as those Sunni powers that you mentioned. They have all wanted to show close relationships with the U.S., but they've struggled in the Biden administration because President Biden has really made clear he does not see the Middle East as the priority. He wants to be focusing on things like China, on Russia, and he sort of sees the Middle East as a distraction. And so it's been hard for those countries to get in a word edgewise with the United States. And now they're seeing this tiny nation that they've long seen as a rival enjoying such a close public relationship with the United States. That could have implications for the way the region handles other U.S. priorities going forward, such as Iran, Joe.
All right. Josh Letterman, thanks so much. Lots of international news this morning. Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world.
Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us this morning from Beijing. Good morning, Janice.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. We start with new data from the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is the United Nations Inspections Group. And a report says that Iran is getting very close to having enough fuel to make a nuclear weapon, possibly within a month, according to the report, though it would take longer to make a warhead. But it does suggest that there will be mounting pressure on the U.S. to make a deal with Iran to either restore or improve that 2015 agreement that former President Trump withdrew from. Now, there's been no comment from the Biden administration yet on Iran's progress or the evidence of it. Iran, meanwhile, maintains that it has no desire for a nuclear arsenal. Border authorities in the UK are training on armored jet skis in the English Channel so they can practice turning around migrant boats and sending them back to France. Now, the Home Secretary in the UK has apparently called this strategy pushback tactics in order to prevent migrants from illegally entering the UK. But it is hugely controversial. It's being fiercely criticized as dangerous, as challenging international obligations as well as maritime law. The Home Office maintains that its main objective is to target smugglers. And here in China, a gold mask dating back about 3,000 years has been found at an archaeological site with hundreds of other relics in the southwestern province of Sichuan. Now, the mask weighs about 100 grams, so that's a good chunk of gold. It was discovered in a series of sacrificial pits that are believed to be from the late Shang dynasty, which ended in 1046 BC. Now, among the other relics, they also found brass and ivory pieces, as well as bronze figurines, and silk fibers. This site is now apparently being considered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Joe, Savannah, back to you.
And if not that, someone would have worn it to the Met Gala.
Yeah. It would have.
Totally.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you, Janice.
Exactly. And coming up, a day in court for the 4 officers involved in the death of George Floyd.
Details and analysis ahead of today's hearing before a federal judge. You're watching Morning News Now. Some of Broadway's biggest shows are back tonight after the pandemic forced them to close for 18 months. Hamilton, Wicked, Chicago, and The Lion King will all hit the stage once again tonight for the first time since March 2020. All Broadway theaters are requiring performers, staff, and guests to present proof of vaccination upon entry. Audiences also have to wear masks inside the theater during the shows. Don't worry if you couldn't snag a ticket. The Lion King will be live streaming Circle of Life on the Disney on Broadway TikTok account tonight. Got all that at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm sure the energy will be electric at all of those openings because I was at the opening a waitress and they gave a standing ovation to pretty much everything.
Yeah,
so.
I know. I love when you told us about that. Also, I'd be willing to bet with as big of a fan as you are. Do you have tickets to any of those?
Lion King, we do have tickets in October, which I've never seen, so I'm excited.
All right.
Sure
well, hey, then don't tune into TikTok tonight or
no, I won't.
ruin the surprise.
I'll wait.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Now, the 4 former Minneapolis police officers involved in the death of George Floyd will be arraigned in federal court today. Virtually, a federal grand jury indicted the former officers back in May. The charges allege they deprived George Floyd of his rights while acting under government authority as he was restrained face down and not resisting. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from Minneapolis. Gabe, good morning. So first, let's just start with what we can expect to happen today. We're used to seeing defendants, of course, walking into court for these types of hearings, but because of the pandemic, today's hearing will be virtual. Can you walk us through what we will see in that courtroom and then what's going to happen over Zoom?
Sure. Good morning, Savannah. Well, yes, as you mentioned, this will be conducted over video conference, so we won't actually see the defendants in person. Reporters will be allowed to go in some sort of media room to watch the proceedings, because as this is federal court, it will not be like the state trial, which was broadcast for the public to see. We won't actually be able to record these proceedings over Zoom and won't be able to broadcast them either. So very different from Chauvin's state trial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gabe, tell us more about the charges here. A federal grand jury handed down this indictment in May, federal there being the key word. What are these former officers facing in court?
Well, Savannah, they're very serious charges. It is federal civil rights charges, as you mentioned, but specifically, all 4 officers are charged with failing to render medical aid to George Floyd. 3 of the 4 are also charged with, violating his rights because of an unreasonable seizure. So these charges are on the federal level, again, very different from the state charges, which we saw Chauvin face earlier this year. Savannah.
Now, Gabe, let's talk about what we saw earlier this year. So Derek Chauvin, for the most part, has faced his legal challenges by himself, interestingly, and he was convicted in state court in April of murder and manslaughter and sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. Now, the other 3 are awaiting trial for charges of aiding and abetting the murder of George Floyd. What is the state of that case?
Yeah, certainly, Savannah. There's a lot of loose ends in this case following the death of George Floyd in May of 2020. As you said, Derek Chauvin was convicted of 3 counts and sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. Those are the state charges. The other 3 officers involved in this case are set to go to trial next year in March. There's then this federal case as well. In addition to that, the Department of Justice is conducting a pattern and practice investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. And even this week, Savannah, a Hennepin County judge is set to weigh in on whether ballot language leading up to the November election that could change the Minneapolis Police Department, whether that language will go through. So certainly a lot of things up in the air following the death of George Floyd. But again, the news today is that this federal arraignment for these 4 officers on civil rights charges, that's expected to happen today over video conference. Savannah.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thank you so much for your reporting. Let's now bring in former New York federal and state prosecutor Tali Farhadian Weinstein to break down today's legal proceedings. She's also an NBC News legal analyst. Tali, thank you so much for joining us. So the grand jury says the former officers violated George Floyd's civil rights during his deadly arrest in May of last year, as we were just discussing with Gabe. Can you explain what kind of evidence leads to a conclusion like that?
Yes. So this is the federal statute that allows you to prosecute officer misconduct, police officer misconduct. And the evidence that's most important is to show that what the officers did, and in this case, violating Mr. Floyd's Fourth Amendment rights to be free from an unreasonable seizure, is that they did it willfully, that they knew their conduct was wrong and against the law, and they did it anyway. And the Justice Department had to put that evidence in front of the grand jury to get the indictment. And ultimately, that will be the most challenging thing for them to prove to get a conviction.
So now, Tali, a jury found Derek Chauvin guilty in April of all 3 counts against him: third-degree murder, second-degree unintentional murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Now, 2 of the defendants asked for their federal trials, what we're talking about today, to be separated from Derek Chauvin's. The third also wants to make a similar request. What they're saying is they're worried that appearing with a convicted murderer now would prejudice their case. Do you think that request will be granted? Does Chauvin's guilty verdict from April impact this case at all?
Well, this is really a separate crime that the Justice Department has alleged here, obviously stemming out of the same incident, the death of Mr. Floyd. But here it's about violating his civil rights, where those earlier cases and Chauvin's convictions in state court were for murder and for manslaughter. And I think that the court will take that seriously, but I expect them to proceed together.
And now a reminder again for our audience to just separate these 2 different things that are going on. What what Derek Chauvin was convicted of was in that state courtroom. So what does the Justice Department taking up this federal case, again, what we're talking about today, against these officers say about the department's priorities?
I think it says a lot about the department's priorities. Both the president and the attorney general have been clear that civil rights are a main priority of this administration and of this Department of Justice. And this is a case about Mr. Floyd's civil rights that led to his death, the violation of his civil rights. And as Gabe reported earlier, I think it likewise is important that the Justice Department is pursuing another civil rights investigation using a different legal mechanism to look not just at this incident here, but at whether there are systemic issues involving civil rights violations in the Minneapolis Police Department.
All right. Tali Farhadian-Weinstein, your expertise is much appreciated here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Department of Justice is making changes to the rules for court-appointed monitors assigned to oversee the reform of some police departments. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland made the announcement yesterday, saying the program put in place following lawsuits against departments has caused some concern among law enforcement officers. NBC News correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now for more on this. Julia, good morning. So first, just tell us, what are these new rules the Attorney General put in place, and how are they going to serve this goal of better serving the community?
Well, it's interesting. And first, I'll explain to you who these rules apply to. These are watchdogs that are appointed by a court after the Justice Department has already intervened in a civil lawsuit to say that there's a police department that's showing some kind of pattern or practice of misconduct. Sometimes it could be racial bias or excessive force. These often follow the high-profile shootings like we would see of someone like George Floyd. In fact, they've done an investigation just like that in Minneapolis. So as a result, they appoint these watchdogs. They've been doing this for some time. It was very prevalent under the Obama administration. And now what Merrick Garland is saying is that there should be some limits on those watchdogs, because they spoke to about 50 different stakeholders, whether they be cities or civil rights activists, and said, you know what, sometimes these people take so long that they end up just draining the resources of the police department, and the taxpayers end up paying millions of dollars, and there's no end in sight. There's no clear goals of what they're trying to accomplish here. And so if we really want this partnership to work and for the reform to happen, there need to be some limits. So they're setting some spending limits and they're setting some term limits. They say that after 5 years, the person would need to be, again, reappointed by a judge to stay in place.
So, Julia, what prompted the Department of Justice to take a deeper look into these guidelines? How'd they come to this decision?
Well, they did a big review. They spoke to mayors. They spoke to police chiefs. They also spoke to people who were advocating for more reform. They talked to civil rights activists. They talked to community leaders. And across the board, they said it was almost unanimous. They heard these complaints that there ended up being distrust between the cities and the person who was coming in to monitor or reform them, because it felt to them like they were just there for the money. And Merrick Garland said it should not be about the bottom line. It should be about building trust.
And Julia, quickly, how does this fit into President Biden's overall agenda to reform police departments?
Well, I think it's to make this system and the tools that they have stronger. We know that under the Trump administration, for example, there was only one investigation into a police department, and it didn't seem to go very far. Now we're seeing more of these types of investigations ramp up, and if they want to use the power of the Justice Department to try to reform local police departments, this is really the only tool they have. We have a very decentralized policing structure in the United States. So if this is all they have, they want it to be as powerful as possible.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much. Coming up, big names going all out for fashion's biggest night. Up next, some of the eye-catching outfits from last night's Met Gala and how Instagram made its mark on the event this year, of course. You're watching Morning News Now. After a year and a half spent in sweatpants for a lot of us, the Met Gala's red carpet looks for the glamour many of us needed, even if we just watched from the couch. The star-studded event returned last night after the pandemic forced its cancellation last year. NBC News youth and internet culture reporter Kellen Rosenblatt joins us now to go through the night's best looks. Kellen, good morning. All right, so we got to start with the outfits. Tell us, though, what was this year's theme? Who do you think nailed it? I got to admit, a lot of times I have a hard time seeing the through line between the outfits and the theme, but walk us through what happened.
So the theme was In America, a lexicon of fashion, and the dress code, so to speak, was American independence. Now, I wasn't sure what that was going to look like on the carpet, but it seems like the interpretation was sort of this classic American glamour. And so we saw stars really doing throwbacks. I thought NJ Rodriguez did an incredible throwback to the sort of 1940s glamour. Billie Eilish with the sort of Marilyn Monroe-inspired look. We also had Megan Thee Stallion, who did a sort of throwback look. So while there was a variety of interpretations, we saw some red, white, and blue, some political statements on the carpet like AOC. It really seemed like the overall through line was a throwback to classic American glamour.
And in the head-to-toe outfit, was that Kim Kardashian?
That was Kim Kardashian.
That's one of the ones I've seen on Instagram the most this morning, and I was wondering who was behind it. All right, Instagram, speaking of, was the official sponsor of the Met Gala, and they actually had the first ever meme correspondent on the red carpet. Tell us about this. Who did they choose to do that? How'd it go? And what is a meme correspondent exactly?
So they chose Saint Hoax, who is a Syrian artist. He's anonymous, but he is prolific for creating memes on Instagram and on the internet. He does a lot of sort of satire of American culture. So he was on the red carpet last night. He was creating memes on his Instagram story as everyone sort of ascended the runway and ascended the stairs at the Met Gala. And it was a lot of reaction gifs. It was a lot of just like, look at this person, just like Billy's here. And it was kind of just like what we were all thinking as we watched the red carpet unfold. I think it was a huge success, and I really hope they bring this back next year.
Yeah, okay, I got to ask you a few questions about what we just saw. First of all, totally agree on Billie Eilish. That looked amazing. Lil Nas X, he had a reveal moment there, so he had some type of suit over and took it off. And then also, as St. Hoax just asked, do we know if that was Kanye?
We think it was Kanye. We don't know for sure if it was Kanye, but we believe that was Kim and Kanye in those blacked out outfits. Definitely a moment that will probably be memed for the rest of the year, if I had to guess.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my, I mean, it just seems difficult to maneuver. There's quite a few stairs there for an outfit like that. All right, Kellen, let's now talk about one celebrity that made headlines even from off the carpet, not arriving. Nicki Minaj. She did not attend the Met Gala. And this is what she tweeted. This is what she said. If I get vaccinated, it won't be for the Met. It'll be once I feel I've done enough research. Kellen, what's the reaction that she's getting this morning to this tweet and to sort of this reveal that she's not vaccinated?
It seems like a lot of fans are really disappointed. I saw some people tweeting Barbs, which are Nicki Minaj fans. They call themselves Barbs. Like, Barbs, we lost. Like, this is not what we want to see. A lot of people are really disappointed and saying that some of her tweets don't hold up with medical research and for what the actual symptoms of a COVID vaccine are. She started tweeting some things that sort of seemed like misinformation about side effects that a friend of a friend had, which people were saying were more likely an STD than really the results of a COVID vaccine. So people seem to be super disappointed this morning in Nicki's response. And I think they're hoping they'll change. She'll change her mind soon.
Yeah. All right. Making some news without even attending the Met Gala, though, because of it. Kellen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up, the dude is making a comeback. Legendary actor Jeff Bridges now in remission and sharing his experience battling both COVID and cancer. What he says about the battle that sent him to the hospitals for several months. This is Morning News Now.
Oscar-winning actor Jeff Bridges is sharing some good news. His cancer is in remission, but it turns out that wasn't his only difficult fight this year. He was also hospitalized with COVID. Now the star says coming close to death is making life that much sweeter.
Life goes on, man.
Jeff Bridges is celebrating life this morning. In a handwritten note posted to his website Monday, the Oscar winner shared, "My cancer is in remission."
Yeah, well, the dude abides.
The actor, perhaps best known for his role as the dude in The Big Lebowski, revealed last October he was diagnosed with lymphoma, a form of blood cancer. Over the last year, he shared glimpses into his battle, but kept quiet on one major complication until now. In a previously unpublished note that he posted Monday, Bridges wrote that both he and his wife Susan were hospitalized with coronavirus last January after he was exposed while undergoing chemotherapy. Sue spends 5 days in the hospital. Me, I'm there 5 weeks because my immune system is shot from the chemo. My dance with COVID makes my cancer look like a piece of cake. The 71-year-old added, despite moments of tremendous pain and getting close to the pearly gates, I felt happy and joyous most of the time. Now he says his COVID is in the rearview mirror, but that he's had to overcome long hauler symptoms and work to get off supplemental oxygen. His goal? To walk his youngest daughter down the aisle at her wedding last month without oxygen. It's one he achieved and more. He not only walked, but danced, sharing the father-daughter dance with fans, complete with his own doodle of them cheek to cheek. A bright moment at the end of a harrowing fight that he says in the end was actually a gift, writing, "Life is brief and beautiful. Love is all around us and available at all times." Bridges is now ready to get back on set. His latest project is a new drama series called The Old Man, which he won't just star in. He's the executive producer. It will mark his return to series TV after 5 decades. Production was put on hold after he shared his cancer diagnosis last fall. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.